Well, greetings. Time for another story. And this particular story is one of my daughter Tasha's favorite stories. And it's called The Weaving of a Dream. It's taken from an ancient Chinese legend and introduces an important new artist whose skillful use of color, imagery, and fantastic detail will win her a wide following. Now, this is authored and illustrated by Marilee Hare, and it's actually, if you look closely, it is signed by the author. And she says, "May all your good dreams become real." Marilee Hare. So this is what the story is about. And if it sounds interesting, stick around. If it doesn't, you can turn it off. Long ago in a land far to the east lived an old widow and her 3 sons. The widow had a very special gift. She could weave beautiful brocades, so lovely that they seemed to come alive with her touch. And with this talent, she supported her family. One day at the market, the widow saw a magnificent painting of a palace surrounded by colorful gardens. Obsessed by its beauty, she bought the painting and decided she would copy it as a brocade. But when the work is finally completed, a gust of wind carries the brocade into the sky towards Sun Mountain. The grief-stricken widow begs her sons to retrieve her work, and what follows is a classic tale of love, loyalty, greed, and envy that will enthrall readers of every age. So let's see if it enthralls you. Title page, The Weaving of a Dream, a Chinese folk tale, retold and illustrated by Marilee Hare, Viking Kestrel. Title page, very nice. Long ago in a land far to the east, there lived an old widow who had 3 sons. The eldest was Leme, the second was Letui, and the youngest was Leger. They lived in a small cottage in a mist-filled valley at the foot of a high mountain. Everyone for hundreds of miles around knew the old widow, for she had a special gift. She could weave beautiful brocades that seemed to come alive under her fingers. The flowers, plants, birds, and animals she wove almost moved with a breeze. Her weaving was in constant demand at the marketplace in the village nearby. It was used to make dresses and jackets, curtains and coverlets. And with the money she earned, the old widow supported her family, although the boys helped by chopping wood and selling it. Now one day, while she was at the market selling some new weavings, she saw a most wondrous painting hanging in a stall nearby. It showed a large palace surrounded by beautiful flower gardens. There were vegetable gardens too, and fruit trees, pastures where cattle grazed, lovely birds, and even a fish pond. A river ran in front of the palace, and the whole painting was warmed by a great red sun. Everything she had always dreamed of was in that painting. She gazed at every detail, and her heart filled with happiness. So this is where she lives. Her place is down below. Goodness. Hopefully you can see all the detail in this picture. I'll kind of move it around. This is the marketplace where she sells her brocades, and when she saw that amazing painting. Now, although she knew she should not, she traded her brocades for the painting. I should be buying rice for my son, she thought, but she could not help herself. 3 times on the way home she stopped to unroll the painting and gaze at it. "Oh, if only we could live in that palace," she whispered to herself. When she got home, she showed the painting to her sons and told them of her dream. "Well, it's lovely, Mother," said Leme and Letui, "but where is the rice you went to buy?" They didn't understand her desire to live in the picture palace. "It's a silly dream, old mother," they said, and she turned to Leger, her youngest son, who with a sadness in her eyes he had never seen before. "Leger, I know that you will understand. I feel I must live in this lovely palace or die," she sighed. "Oh, don't be sad, Mother. I will think of something." As he comforted her, an idea came to him. So here she is, gazing at the painting on the way home. And she believes that she just has to live inside. "Why don't you do a weaving of the painting? Your weavings are so lifelike. As you work on it every day, it will be almost like living there." "You are right, Leger," she said with a smile. "It is the closest I will ever come to this lovely place." So she set to work by candlelight that very evening. Once she started weaving, she didn't stop. For days and months she worked, her shuttle flashing through the threads. Lemay and Latouille became very upset with her mother. One evening they even pulled her hands away from the loom. "You are no longer making brocades to sell, old mother. Now we must all live on the money we make chopping wood, and we are tired of working so hard." Leger ran to stop them. "Let mother be. She must weave that beautiful palace or die of grief. I will chop all the wood." Well, from then on, Leger chopped day and night, cutting wood to sell for food. Two of her sons upset that she's not selling her brocades anymore and they have to work. The old widow continued to weave every hour, on and on, never stopping. At night she worked by candlelight. The smoke burned her eyes and made them red and sore, but she didn't stop. After 1 year, tears began to drop from her eyes onto the threads, and they became part of the river and fish pond she was weaving. After 2 years, blood dripped from her eyes onto her hand, and down her hand onto the shuttle it ran, and the drops of blood were woven into the splendid red sun and glowing flowers. On and on she worked, and at last, during the 3rd year, she was finished. What a beautiful brocade it was, the most magnificent ever seen. Mother and son stared at it in wonder. Even Lemay and Latouille couldn't take their eyes from it. The garden, the flowers, the beautiful palace, songbirds of every kind, luscious fruits and vegetables ready to pick, all in the most perfect detail. And behind the palace were pastures for the fat sheep and cattle, and fields of maize and rice. The river sparkled in front, and the marvelous sun warmed every thread. "Oh, Mother, how proud we are of your wonderful work," whispered her sons. The old widow stretched her tired back and rubbed her bloodshot eyes, and a smile creased her wrinkled cheeks and slowly grew into a joyous laugh. And here she is, with the blood dripping from her hands onto the shuttle and into the colors of the brocade, of the weaving. And here she is, smiling. Oops, let's see if I can get that. There we go. And so proud of her work. Notice the red sun in the back, the rivers and the ponds, and how pleased she is. Suddenly, a great wind blew the hut door open with a crash. It raced through the room, knocking everything over, and then, taking the wondrous brocade with it, it blew out of the window and up into the sky to the east. They all ran after it, screaming and waving their arms, but the brocade was gone, vanished. When the boys turned, they saw their mother lying unconscious on the doorstep. They carried her inside and laid her on her bed. Slowly she opened her eyes. "Please, Lemay, my oldest son," she said, "go east, follow the wind, and bring my brocade back to me. It means more to me than my life." Lemay nodded, put on his sandals, took a few supplies, and headed east. Within a month's time he came to a mountain. When he reached the very top, he saw a strange house made all of stone, with a stone horse standing by the door. The horse's mouth was open, as if it were trying to eat some of the red berries that were growing at its feet. On the front doorstep sat a white-haired old crone. "And where are you headed, young man?" she croaked in a little used voice. "I am going east," said Lemay, "where the wind has carried off a beautiful brocade my mother spent 3 years weaving." Ah, that brocade, cackled the fortune teller, for that is what she was. The fairies of Sun Mountain sent the wind to bring it to them. They wish to copy its beautiful design. You may never find it. The way is very difficult. Here is the fortune teller. I wonder if she'll have some advice for him. Please, tell me how to get there, pleaded LeMay. First, you must knock out 2 front teeth and put them into the mouth of my stone horse, and then it will be able to move and eat the berries it has wanted for so long. When it has eaten 10 berries, it will let you on its back and will carry you to Sun Mountain. But on the way, you must first pass over Flame Mountain, which is constantly on fire. When the horse goes through the flames, you must not cry out, even if the pain is unbearable. Keep your cries to yourself, or you will immediately be burned to ashes. Next, you will come to the Sea of Ice. When you go through the ice, you must not cry out, though your whole body will become numb with cold. If you do cry out, you will sink to the bottom of the sea. If you pass through these places as I have told you, you will then see Sun Mountain and will be given your mother's fine brocade to carry home. LeMay ran his tongue over his front teeth. He thought of the burning fire and freezing ice, and he grew very pale. The old fortune teller saw his face and laughed. "Ha! You will not be able to endure it, young man, and after all, you need not. I will give you a box of gold. Go home and live happily." Well, from inside the house she brought the box. LeMay took it quickly and turned toward home. He had gone about a mile before he realized how much better it would be if he spent all the gold on himself instead of sharing it with his family. So instead of going home, he headed south toward the big city. Well, that didn't quite work out, right? Did it? See the stone horse up above in the old fortune teller's house? So, 1 sun down, 2 to go. Waiting for LeMay's turn, the old widow grew thinner and thinner. After 2 months, she could wait no longer. "Latouille, you must go east and find my brocade. It means my life," she told her middle son. Latouille agreed, and he put on his sandals, took some supplies, and headed east. Within a month's time, he was standing at the door of the stone house, listening to the old fortune teller tell him he must knock out his teeth and go silently through fire and ice. Latouille also grew very pale. He too received a box of gold, and he went to the big city with it instead of returning home. Again, the old widow waited. She grew as thin as a piece of old firewood. Every day she spent lying in her bed, staring at the door, waiting for Latouille's return. And every day when he didn't come, she wept. Her old, tired eyes finally went blind from weeping. Leger could stand it no longer. "Old mother, please let me go look for the brocade. Perhaps LeMay and Latouille have been injured. I will search for them too. I will ask the neighbors to care for you while I'm gone." After thinking for a long time, the old widow agreed, but she hated to let Leger leave, for she loved her youngest son the very best. So the youngest son is going to try. Leger put on his sandals and took some supplies, and he threw back his shoulders and proudly started on his mission to the east. In half the time it had taken his brothers, he reached the top of the mountain. And again there was the old fortune teller with her stone horse. She repeated the instructions a 3rd time and watched Leger's face closely. It didn't grow pale as his brothers had. And when she offered him the gold that his brothers had accepted, he refused it. "I must bring back the brocade from my mother, or she will surely die." Immediately he picked up a stone and he knocked out his 2 front teeth, and he fed them to the stone horse. After the horse had eaten the 10 berries, Leger jumped on its back and, clinging to its mane, kicked the horse with his heels. High into the air the wonderful horse jumped, and away they flew. As fast as the wind they were following. For 3 days and 3 nights they flew across the sky, and at last they reached Flame Mountain. Into the fire they dashed without a pause, The red flames hissed around Leger and stabbed at his skin, but he didn't cry out. With teeth clenched tight, he endured the pain, and in half a day's time he came out of the flames and stood on the shore of the sea of ice. Again, without hesitation, he sped on. Steam rose from his burning hot body as he hit the ice-cold water. He felt his legs and arms grow numb and bleed from the sharp edges of the ice, but he uttered no sound. In half a day's time he came out of the sea of ice, and before him, glowing in the golden light, shone beautiful Sun Mountain. The warmth of it soothed his body and eased his pain. So here he is on the horse going into the fire. Notice the beautiful detail Marilee Hare added to her pictures. Her use of light and shadow, very nice. The loveliest palace he had ever seen stood on the top of the mountain, and from its windows came the sound of women's voices singing and laughing. Up the mountain the stone horse flew, and soon they stood before the palace door. There two very strange creatures, unlike anything Leger had ever seen before, stood guard, but not even they could stop him now. Down from the horse he jumped, straight through the door he marched. The creatures didn't blink, nor did he. In front of him was a great hall filled with beautiful fairies, all weaving as fast as they could. In the very center of the hall, for them to copy, hung his mother's brocade. Startled by the sight of Leger, the fairies stopped their weaving and sat as still as stones. "Don't be afraid," he told them. "I have only come for my mother's brocade." At the thought of losing the brocade, some of the fairies began to cry. But one fairy stood and said, "Very well, you may have the brocade in the morning. Just allow us one more night of weaving so that we can finish. You may stay here with us and rest for the night." Well, Leger agreed, and the fairies sent one of the creatures to prepare for him a most delicious dinner, after which Leger fell into a deep sleep. When the sun set and the light in the hall began to grow dim, one fairy hung a shining pearl that filled the hall with light, and they continued weaving through the night. Goodness gracious, look at that castle. With all those fairies weaving as fast as they can to finish their copy. Oh my goodness. Look at that. I'll have to peek over the top to see it. It's pretty amazing. Look at all the characters in there. And the beautiful detail. Goodness. One beautiful fairy, dressed all in red, finished her weaving first, and she had always been the finest and the quickest of the weavers, but when she held her weaving next to the old woman's, hers looked very poor by comparison, for the colors were not as bright, nor the stitches so fine. "This brocade is so perfect," the fairy thought. "Instead of trying to copy it, I wish I could become part of it." So while the other fairies worked on, the red fairy started to weave into the old widow's brocade a picture of herself sitting by the fish pond. Well, late in the night, Leger woke with a start. "Suppose the fairies will not give me the brocade in the morning," he thought. "My poor mother has been ill so long. What will become of her?" And as he looked around, he saw that all the fairies had fallen asleep over their looms. There stood his mother's brocade, more lovely than ever by the light of the pearl. Quickly Leger took down the brocade and ran to his waiting horse. Away into the moonlight they flew. In 3 days and 3 nights they stood before the fortune-teller's house. "Well done, my son," said the old woman. She took his teeth from the stone horse's mouth and put them back into Leger's mouth as if they had never been gone. The horse immediately froze into his old position. "Quickly, my son, you must return home, for your mother is dying." From behind her back the old woman pulled a fine pair of embroidered boots and set them on the ground. "Put these on. They will speed your way." Oh, look at the boots that she gave him to put on. Truly fine boots. But what do you suppose the boots will help him do? Hardly had Leger put the boots on than he was standing on his own doorstep. Inside he saw his dear mother, now grown thinner than a splinter. At that very moment her heart was beating its last. "No, mother, don't die," cried Leger, running to her bedside. He pulled the brocade from his shirt and spread it over her. The warmth of its gleaming sun soothed her and pulled her back to life, and she felt the delicate threads with her fingertips. Her eyes began to clear, and her sight returned. She sat up in bed and gazed at the wonderful brocade that had taken 3 years from her and almost cost her her life. "Oh, my most faithful son," she said, "help me take the brocade out of this dark hut into the sunlight where we can see it better." Outside they lovingly spread the brocade on the ground. Suddenly a soft, sweet-smelling breeze swept through the valley. It gently drew the brocade off the ground and spread it over the yard. Larger and larger and longer and wider it grew. Over the fence and over the house it spread, covering everything with its silken threads. The shabby hut disappeared, and in its place the brocade itself took on the very shape and form of the beautiful palace. Before their eyes the brocade was coming to life. The gardens, the fruit trees, the pasture, all became real. The colorful birds began to sing, the cattle grazed on the rich pasture grass, and there, sitting by a fish pond, was the red fairy, as bright as the sun overhead. Wow, wow. The brocade is becoming real. With a fairy sitting by the pond. Who would have thought? The old widow was greatly astonished, for she knew she had not woven a fairy into her brocade, but she welcomed her and brought her to live with them in the beautiful palace. She asked all of her neighbors to live with them too, for there was more than enough room, and they had all been kind to her while Leger was away. Leger and the red fairy were married, and so the weaving of a dream was completed. One day as Leger, the fairy, and his mother sat in the garden making toys for the new baby that would be coming soon, 2 beggars crept up and stared at them through the garden fence. Who do you suppose those beggars were? They were Lemay and Latouille. They had gone to the big city and lost all their gold, squandering it on themselves, and now they had nothing left. And when they saw the happy scene before them, they thought of the terrible thing they had done. They were filled with grief and remorse, and they turned silently, picked up their begging sticks, and they crept away. There's a lesson there, isn't there? See those guys back there by the gate? Looking at how happy everyone is. Well, and that's the end of the story. So I hope you enjoyed that. The Weaving of a Dream by Marilee Harris. Again, one of Tasha's favorite stories, one of my favorite stories. And you can see back here on the shelf, and this whole stack of books I have over here, if I can get my hand going right there, those are stories I'm going to read to you because they're stories worth retelling. Right? So you have a wonderful day, and take care.